Shadow Hack. Chapter 451 Mission. They sealed the island so quickly? Seems like that old bastard figured out that his son won't be returning to this world, even if he doesn't have any definite proof for it. Li Yunmyu coldly sneered. Sure enough, reality wasn't different from what he'd thought would happen. He was on Blue Underworld Island, which was close to Blue Moon Island, and not much later, it had sealed it, prohibiting him from using Blue Underworld Island's teleport channel. Because of that, even if he succeeded in killing the group of pursuers, his path of escape was still gone. When heaven doesn't leave a path, no one can enter or escape. When banned from the teleport channel to leave the territory of Blue Moon Island, Li Yunmyu was like a lone soldier trapped deep within enemy lines. Regardless of where he went, he would be surrounded by enemies. Fortunately, I still have this, so I can leave alive. Li Yunmyu nodded to Li Feng, who merged with his shadow. He then took out an indigo pearl. It had been given to Li Yunmyu by the sea breeze whale, and he casually inputted his flux energy inside the indigo pearl. Why had he chosen to escape to Blue Underworld Isle? Perhaps the main reason was because apart from the teleport channels of Blue Moon Sect, the town of Blue Underground Island was the closest region where he could use a teleport channel. But Li Yunmyu wasn't an idiot, so naturally he knew that the other party might try to restrict his movements. Sure enough, from that moment, he wouldn't be able to use any teleport channel in the territory of Blue Moon Sect. It wasn't important, however, because he had been able to escape here before they could catch him. This place provided him another escape route by allowing him to summon the manatee. The reason why Li Yunmyu had chosen the manatee from the 8 races serving under the sea breeze whale was mainly because there was a branch of them living in the vicinity of Blue Underworld Island. This island was closest to Blue Moon Sect, and so beasts of this race could be summoned faster than others, which was exactly what he needed. Li Yunmyu had used his foresight to choose the manatee as his mount. The formless energy fluctuations coming from the indigo pearl quickly spread through the ocean. Before long, large waves began to billow around the shore of the island, and a 200-meter large enormous beast emerged from the ocean with its 8 glittering claws and 3 tails lashing around like iron whips. Li Yunmyu stood up and said with a slight smile, "Sire Balu, I hadn't expected that I would see you again before long. Annoying human. You are the most troublesome and annoying as well as the weakest human I have ever met," Manatee Balu said in a loud voice while puffing out a burst of hot air from its nose. Its tone was filled with annoyance and impatience. In fact, given its strength, it had sensed Li Yunmyu the instant he had fled to Blue Underworld Island. But as long as he didn't use the indigo pearl given by Sea Breeze Whale, it wouldn't show itself. Li Yunmyu was even suspicious that this manatee wished that he would die, saving it from the trouble of carrying him around. But the reality wasn't the same as fantasy in this regard. Li Yunmyu had reached the island alive. "Sire Balu, this time, I want to go to Whale Island." Li Yunmyu smiled faintly and stated his destination. Whale Island. Although it is the largest neutral island in the vicinity, it won't stop the flies of Blue Moon Sect from coming after you. I advise you to follow me to Deep Ocean region to escape. In the place where my clan lives, Blue Moon Sect won't dare to intrude, Manatee Balu said, not approving of his decision. But Li Yunmyu remained unmoved. He couldn't deny that the manatee's proposal had indeed moved his heart a little, but after thinking carefully about it, he didn't think it would be a wise choice. He would be a human living among manatees, and he had many secrets, so he vetoed the proposal of the extremely safe asylum. He knew that enormous beasts possessed a bloodline unique to their clans. Their natural lives were very long and time didn't hold much meaning for them. In fact, their strength increased even while they hibernated for a long time. Because of that, enormous beasts weren't fond of moving around, and obviously Manatee Balu had the same thoughts. Bringing Li Yunmyu with him would have solved the problem of being summoned repeatedly. However, Li Yunmyu had already formed a plan. He shook his head without saying anything and stayed firm on his decision. Before long, the manatee issued a heaven-shaking howl. Riding on it, Li Yunmu quickly left Blue Underworld Island. Zhang Yuan's father would have never thought that Li Yunmu could use an enormous beast to quickly break away from the groups of hunters sent by him. Sure enough, before long, the core disciples who had come to the rescue of Fiend reached Blue Underworld Island. Although they weren't many in number, just 3, they were anxiously welcomed by the Hall Master of Blue Underworld Island. The 3 great flux experts were like messengers of gods for the people of the small island under the jurisdiction of Blue Moon Island. After several days, Li Yunmu reached the Whale Island once more. What caught him off guard was that the person sent by Underworld Serpent to receive him was the woman called in. She quickly approached him and said with a smile, "Young Master Li, I hadn't expected to see you again so soon." Li Yunmu slightly creased his brows and said with astonishment, "Missin, I didn't expect that your Underworld Serpent is so powerful that within a few days you have already located the targets." He knew that people like Mantian, Hai Yu, or Zhang Huia along with the other 10 descenders weren't complete idiots who would show off. Moreover, they had scattered themselves in the different regions of the origin world, each of which was quite large in itself. "I hadn't expected that this Underworld Serpent will move so quickly." But his thinking was wrong. Even if Underworld Serpent was powerful, it still couldn't dig out everyone's information within a brief few days. The reason why An had revealed herself was just to personally receive Li Yunmu. "Young Master Li thinks too much of us." Truth be told, An had come for another matter to have a chat with young Master Li. I wonder whether young Master Li would be interested. Another matter. Li Yunmu's heart jolted. After thinking about it, he nodded. He followed An into a room in a fancy restaurant's 3rd floor. Chapter 452 Weak should know their weak. Li Yunmu knew that the branch of Underworld Serpent in Whale City was one of its main branches, so it needn't be said that the restaurant should be one of its properties. Thus, after sitting down, Li Yunmu said without mincing his words, "I wonder, what sort of matter does Underworld Serpent has that requires a trifling flux expert like me?" Li Yunmu's complexion wasn't good. Among the large amount of information collected by the system on Whale Island, all of it had confirmed that Underworld Serpent was considered as the most publicly reliable organization. Especially in regards to clients, they were extremely stringent and would never investigate their secrets. But how long would it take until he was hit in the face with reality? Since the other party had taken the initiative to say that they had another matter, Li Yunmu couldn't help but think that if they hadn't investigated him, then how could they have an important matter related to a flux expert like him? Therefore, his expression was quite unpleasant and full of gloom. He didn't conceal it either, because he felt that the other party had betrayed his trust. First of all, young Master Li shouldn't be mistaken. Our Underworld Serpent would never break that rule. The reason I have come to find you is mainly because young Master Li is being watched by a powerhouse character in Whale Island. Given that we prioritize our client's safety, we naturally investigated this person who was looking you. As a result, we accidentally discovered some information relating the two of you, and replied in a voice that was neither slow nor fast. Li Yunmu was startled on hearing that someone was trying to find him. He was caught completely off guard. He had come only a few times to Whale City and hadn't made any eye-catching movements before. If he had caught someone's eyes because of revealing some wealth, it could only be some small thief. But if it had been some third-rate thief watching him, it wouldn't have attracted the attention of Underworld Serpent. Could it be because of the transaction of power grains back then? Had it been leaked? But Li Yunmu still couldn't understand what was happening. It has to be known that back then, he had used different identities when coming to the plaza. While looking at Li Yunmu's gloomy expression, An took a small sip from the cup of tea in front of her and then said in a reminder tone of voice, "Young Master Li, this world is full of tricks which even gods and demons don't know about. Even the Underworld Serpent King who stands on the peak of our Underworld Serpent wouldn't have the full confidence in deceiving all probing methods." If he still didn't understand what had happened after she spoke so much, then his cultivation journey would have been a waste. Instantly, he became clear that he had made a miscalculation. Since he had used the 1000-face mask and had the system scanning his surroundings and defending against the unexpected, he had thought that his business regarding extreme-grade power grain had gone flawlessly. But now that he thought about it, he understood that he had really been naive. Anne's words were correct. There were many tricks and abilities in this world against which any sort of defense might not work. Even if he possessed the assistance of the system, he still couldn't be too confident. Li Yunmu was forced to learn a profound lesson. If he didn't want his secrets to leak, then it was very simple. He had to make sure to never leak this secret to anyone else. Only then would it remain completely safe. Then Misson, what's your opinion about what I should do? How much influence does the other party possess? Surprisingly, he even attracted the interest of your organization, Li Yunmu bluntly said with a gloomy expression still on his face. Young Master Li speaks bluntly, so Anne also won't mince her words. Honestly speaking, we are only responsible in protecting the client while he is in business with us. But since we know that young Master Li has a way to obtain a large amount of extreme-grade power grain, our Whale City's branch would like to collaborate with you. As for the people troubling you, even if young Master Li doesn't collaborate with us, our organization will still eliminate them. Even if they have no relation to our organization, young Master Li has still entrusted a commission to the organization, so if the other party cannot differentiate between good and bad, still wishing to meddle, it will become our organization's matter. Anne's words were quite mild and gentle, but her tone was filled with arrogance. Is this the way this world's top organizations act? Li Yunmu was shocked. He was again shaken by the confidence of Underworld Serpent. Collaboration is possible, but I must clarify something. The amount of the extreme-grade power grain which I can trade is finite. I'm afraid that it won't be able to fulfill your needs. Li Yunmu quickly thought about it and decided on a plan. From Anne's words, 3 things were clear. First was that the other party wanted to trade with him. This other party was the branch of Underground Serpent in Whale City represented by Anne. Second was that this other party knew that he could produce extreme-grade power grain from some unknown source. Although the amount he could trade wasn't large, they were still willing to collaborate with him. This clearly implied that the other party was paying quite a bit of attention to his extreme-grade power grain. The third important fact was that the other party said that even if he didn't wish to collaborate with them, they would still eliminate the trouble, following the rules of Underground Serpent of him being their client. But once Li Yunmu heard this point, he could clearly understand that the organization was credible. They hinted to him that after their business was over and other administrative level powers came to look for him, it would no longer be related to Underworld Serpent. After hearing this, if it was an ordinary person, they wouldn't find anything odd, but Li Yunmu was used to these sort of schemes. He naturally could understand Anne's meaning. The hidden meaning was that after the business between him and Underworld Serpent was finished, then even if no one had been looking for trouble for him related to extreme-grade power grain, then probably the Underworld Serpent itself would create some opponent to find trouble for him. So this is the Underworld? It's quite dark, but everything in the origin world is dependent on one's strength. Clearly, Li Yunmu had encountered great trouble because of extreme-grade power grain, as the Underworld Serpent was indirectly hinting that they wanted to trade with him. Becoming the enemy of this organization was far more dangerous than being hunted by the original enemy. Because of that, Li Yunmu only thought for an instant before lifting his hands without any resistance, signifying that he was willing to collaborate. His attitude had made it clear that weak didn't have any right to resist. Since he couldn't fight back, then he had to take the initiative to join the other side. Li Yunmu's directness in understanding his position and making the decision caused Anne to take another look at this flux expert youngster. Your attitude is pretty good. Hence, Anne doesn't need to make things difficult for you. She pursed her lips and looked at Li Yunmu with a smile. As for what her exact age was, Li Yunmu didn't know, but she appeared to be around 27 years. Her smile clearly displayed her mature demeanor. That's right, weak should understand that they are weak, he calmly replied. Chapter 453 Changed Status. Then all right. Seems like the relation between us and young Master Li will become much deeper. Be at ease, the person trying to find you will soon be dealt with by us. With that, young Master Li's secret will continue remaining a secret. And nodded, then continued speaking. As for business, we won't treat young Master Li unfairly. For instance, we will purchase the power grains at the same price as your previous traders. What do you think? Many thanks. Li Yunmu was slightly surprised, but he still nodded and agreed. He had mentally prepared to have a slice of meat cut off, but given the system's research on flux binding pill, he wasn't too concerned about the temporary loss. He hadn't expected that the other party would surprisingly not ask him to make a loss. After hearing it, he couldn't help but admire the work methods of the woman in front of his eyes. She had actually found and suggested a win-win initiative while being in absolute advantage over Li Yunmu. He couldn't help but look her in a new light. He had already found that she had never cultivated, but how did she possess so much authority in Underworld Serpent? It could be guessed with ease that the position of the other party in Underworld Serpent wasn't low. After all, An could represent the entire Whale City in negotiation with Li Yunmu. Since both parties had formally established collaboration, they could talk about further details with a lot of ease. They talked about the particulars at the top floor of the restaurant for quite a while, then said their farewells. Within this business exchange, Li Yunmu had received unexpected gains. In fact, he had obtained great benefits, on the contrary to his current circumstances. Not only was he not forced to reduce the price of his extreme-grade power grains, he had even obtained the backing of a powerhouse which could provide him asylum against his enemies. He was also provided with a gold status tile of Underworld Serpent. According to the data collected by the system, Underworld Serpent divided their clients into 5 classes based on their worth. This classification was as follows: iron, silver, gold, platinum, and black gold. Altogether, there were 5 status classes. The different classes were provided with different treatments. Since Li Yunmu's previous business hadn't been finished, he hadn't been provided with any status tile. But now he was given the gold class tile, which might not be the highest class, but still provided many benefits. The best one was that every month Li Yunmu had the authority to invite 3 golden serpents of Underworld Serpent to assist him in settling a problem. This was free of charge, and he could choose the 3 by himself. As for the strength of golden serpents, then after comparison with the 5 types of identity tiles, they should have the strength of great flux experts at least. Every month, Li Yunmu could use this benefit once and call 3 great flux experts to settle any problem. Just based on this one point, he had made a great profit from his deal. Naturally, this benefit could be invoked at the most dangerous time. Ordinary conflicts or tasks like using them for hired thugs wouldn't be in the scope of this agreement. As for the demerit of this collaboration? Naturally, the demerit was equally large. The entire stock of Li Yunmu's extreme-grade power grains was under the control of Underground Serpent. In other words, it was an extremely powerful leverage against him. If Li Yunmu didn't cooperate with the organization, it wouldn't even need to make any move by itself. It could simply publicize in that he could refine power grain and let even more terrifying powers of the world to hunt him down. Oh, since my status has changed and I have become a partner of this branch of Underworld Serpent, I can stay on Whale Island for as long as I want. I don't need to worry about Blue Moon Island's sneak attacks here. Li Yunmu went inside a herb store and bought another batch of herbs to refine them according to Meridian Nurturing Flux Point technique. It was a body-nurturing cultivation method from ancient times to which Li Yunmu attached great importance. Although he had already complemented the deficiency of his flux points, he hadn't stopped soaking his body in the medicinal liquid. Yes, host should stay at Whale Island. With the branch of Underground Serpent here, even if that elder of Blue Moon Sect is filled with enormous hatred, Blue Moon Sect won't dare to provoke Underground Serpent, the system replied after analyzing everything. This was the rule as well as the path of existence in the origin world. With his own strength, Li Yunmu would be annihilated by a single elder of Blue Moon Sect, or even a group of great flux experts sent to hunt him down. But when a third-rate sect like Blue Moon Sect encountered a first-rate organization, they could only swallow their anger and return without doing anything to him. This was a privilege which came from power and influence. Within the complicated situation of the origin world, this sort of thing happened all the time. Most often, a core disciple of first-rate power would be more domineering and unbridled than the sect leader of a third-rate sect. And one couldn't do anything to him, because if someone attacked them, that would be equivalent to inviting the first-rate power to exterminate one's entire family. In this world, anyone without strength needed to be conscious of their own powerlessness and be ready to bow down and submit when the situation demanded. This was the only way to survive. Almost every powerhouse had obtained its strength by following this principle and tempering their willpower as well as tenaciousness. Since all the troubles had been settled, Li Yunmu finally had a moment of peace. While staying at the tavern on Whale Island, Li Yunmu deliberately didn't conceal his whereabouts. Finally, on the third day, Blue Moon Sect's third wave of hunters made discreet inquiries about him to track him down. Although they couldn't attack him on the island under a neutral power, they could continue tracking him down in secret. After all, their assignment was to hunt down the traitors of the sect. The power behind Whale Island only observed everything with one eye closed. As long as the two parties didn't make too much fuss or destroy their city, Whale City wouldn't interfere. After that third day, Li Yunmu remained unaffected. As for the group of hunters sent by Blue Moon Island, they could only return gloomily. During the day, Li Yunmu hadn't done anything, but the hunters from Blue Moon Sect had discovered something. The reason behind the quick conclusion to was that a member of Underworld Serpent had suddenly appeared in front of them and said two short sentences. They were, "Li Yunmu is currently a partner of our Underworld Serpent. Please leave." Just those few words were enough to make them retreat. This time, the mid-stage Great Flux expert had caused the hunters of Blue Moon Island to return unconditionally, without daring to say anything. Chapter 454 Attack on a New Point. For the time being, Li Yunmu was certain that Blue Moon Sect wouldn't try to find trouble for him, even if he entered its territory. Not until he personally went to Blue Moon Island would the other party dare to capture him. Borrowing someone's authority was indeed very ferocious. But in the end, it was still someone else's influence. Li Yunmu was more than clear about the fact that the most reliable thing in the world was still his own strength. If he himself possessed the strength of a sage flux expert, then even an organization like Underground Serpent wouldn't dare to chase him without apprehensions. That was strength. Thus, on the morning of the fourth day, Li Yunmu quickly spent a large amount of wealth and purchased a serene and quiet courtyard on the western shore of Whale Island. From then on, it became his temporary safe residence. He became a citizen of Whale Island and settled there. The protection of Underground Serpent was close at hand there, so it could be considered that he could finally stand back on his feet. Naturally, he had to pay great price for this. He had to spend close to 50,000 contribution points to accomplish it. It had to be known that the houses on the western side couldn't be purchased by ordinary people. Their residences wouldn't obtain the acknowledgement by Whale City. The western side housed the residences of administrative powers from everywhere. Since the majority of cultivators had chosen to settle in this part of the neutral city, the price of the small courtyard was enough to clean out the majority of Li Yunmu's contribution points. At dawn, he had taken a shower and rested for a long time before starting to cultivate. He was now sitting cross-legged in his small courtyard. Before leaving Blue Moon Island, he had purchased the technique to open 33 flux points. Now, he began to examine it in detail. In the origin world, opening flux points wasn't free for flux experts. Of the 108 flux points, which far surpassed the number of flux points on Earth, the 105 were sold in every city, martial hall, organization, or sect. The currency required to purchase these flux points was the singular currency of the entire cultivation world, contribution points. The reason why Li Yunmu had specifically chosen to buy from Blue Moon Island was because he was once an inner disciple there, so the price he needed to pay was much smaller than it would be when trying to purchase the technique through other channels. Just from this point, it could be seen that all the most crucial natural resources as well as techniques were controlled by the people standing at the peak of the pyramid. They unilaterally controlled the methods to refine power grain and flux binding pills. The markets as well as even flux point opening and all sorts of other cultivation methods were in their hands. What were these countless sects and organizations of the origin world? All of them were basically equivalent to merchants who transported goods. They were all at the peak of pyramid, using an imaginary currency like contribution points which they had turned into the only currency of the origin world. In fact, they had forced the sects to use this imaginary currency to make sure it permeated into the markets. Li Yunmu couldn't even imagine how enormous was the amount of resources under the control of these people at the top of pyramid. At least, he wasn't willing to think about it for the time being. After all, the more he thought about it, the more trouble he would invite upon himself. Before long, Li Yunmu took out a cultivation relaying globe for opening the first flux point. The next instant, his consciousness entered the space within it. Inside, a figure would repeatedly display the movements of flux energy to attack the path to the new flux point. First time, second time, 10th time, 30th time, 50th time, 78th time. Finally, at the 78th time, Li Yunmu felt that he had understood. He didn't continue watching until the 99th time and retreated from the space. He carefully meditated upon the path of moving flux energy shown in the cultivation relaying globe as well as what he had comprehended. After that, he took out a flux binding pill and began to move the flux energy to attack a new flux point. He had already complemented the innate deficiency of his flux points. The task he wanted to accomplish now was to open new flux points and use flux energy to temper them. After that, he could store a large amount of flux energy in them. The first flux point which he had chosen to open was the flux point under the sole of his foot, near the back part. When he successfully opened it, his movement speed as well as the sudden eruption of flux energy in his feet would be upgraded. Li Yunmu's talent and perception weren't very good. No, if speaking truth, they were pretty poor. If his aptitude hadn't been so weak, he wouldn't have needed to use the assistance of the system's experience point to awaken as a fluxer. But after he had started cultivating the Great Sun Tyrant body muscle marrow secrets, his aptitude had entered the upper mid-grade. Because of that, he succeeded in opening the flux point with the help of one cultivation relaying globe. And as expected, with the steady supply of flux energy from flux binding pill, he was able to attack the Pentium point under the sole without any problems. The large amount of flux energy in the flux binding pill was then exhausted to fill the flux point. With this, he had finally taken the next step and broken through the limit of Earth's fluxers. He had opened his 73rd flux point. After he opened the first of the remaining 36 points, Li Yunmu immediately observed the increase in his strength. Sure enough, if a cultivator wanted to become stronger, nothing could increase their strength more quickly than opening a flux point. He had only spent half a day, and within this short period of time, the increase in his strength was equivalent to cultivating bitterly for half a month. After successfully opening the flux point, his flux strength had increased from 130 points to 134 points. It was an increase of 4 points. As for his physical strength, with the support from the new flux point, it had finally broken through the bottleneck at which it had been stuck for the past few months. It had increased from 53 oxen to 57. This number represented that Li Yunmu's physical strength had already crossed the threshold into Great Flux Expert realm. If it continued to increase, then by the time he opened all the flux points, the strength of his flesh would far surpass that of ordinary Great Flux Masters. This also implied that when he entered the Great Flux Expert realm, his starting point would be far ahead of other Great Flux Experts. Li Yunmu wasn't the least bit astonished regarding this deduction. After all, he was cultivating peak-level cultivation methods while his body tempering methods were also the most formidable. Chapter 455 Change into a Real Monster. Regardless if it was the Devil Dragon Bone Refining Secrets or the Evolved Great Sun Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets or the Spirit Pincer Step, all of them increased his physical strength. All of them were also at least A grade, besides Spirit Pincer Step. Naturally, because of this, Li Yunmu's physical strength had far surpassed that of other flux experts of the same level. Even if the natives of the origin world had naturally powerful flesh, they were still unable to compare to his old self, let alone him when he had complemented the innate deficiency of his flux points. Now is the Tyrant Dragon point. After the first step had succeeded, Li Yunmu's mind was shaken, and he chose to start cultivating the second flux point with great motivation. Tyrant Dragon point was another flux point near his feet. The previous one was mainly to increase the speed of flux energy movement near the sole of his feet, while Tyrant Dragon point would increase the total amount of flux energy moving around the soles of his feet. It was like a water pipe with 1 centimeter diameter being enlarged to 3 centimeter diameter. Naturally, after it was done, the amount of flux energy moving around the soles of his feet would increase greatly. That being said, he now had opened 2 extremely important flux points which would increase the movement and amount of flux energy around the soles of his feet. From this, it could be clearly seen that among the 36 flux points which Li Yunmu hadn't cultivated, some were very important flux points. No wonder then that there was such a vast difference between fluxers and flux experts. After experiencing the cultivation of the previous flux point, Li Yunmu had become much more proficient in opening another flux point. In less than 3 hours, he completely opened the Tyrant Dragon point. Once he succeeded in it, Li Yunmu's flux energy strength increased by a terrific amount, rising to 145 points. It was an increase of 11 points. As for his physical strength, it had also swelled to 62 oxen from 57. This was equivalent to 3 months of cultivation. After understanding it, Li Yunmu had to accept that cultivating this way increased his strength greatly. At that moment, even without using any trump cards and just relying on his flux energy and physical strength, he could challenge the old monsters of top 5 residential regions. If he was to encounter Demon Flame and Fiend now, then with his present strength, he would definitely not need to run. This was the effect of opening new flux points. Li Yunmu had to pay a price of 7 flux binding pills to attack the second point. Unexpectedly, opening the Tyrant Dragon point had used up more than twice the amount of flux binding pills required to open Pentium point. This caused even Li Yunmu's heart to ache. It has to be known that the public price of a flux binding pill was 300 contribution points. In other words, Li Yunmu had used up 2,700 contribution points to open 2 flux points. There was no way ordinary flux experts could pay such a terrifying price. Not even speaking about them, even the flux experts from rich families didn't cultivate in such a way. After all, there was just too much money required for this sort of cultivation. The cultivators occupying the front 10 rooms only obtained 10 contribution points per day. From this, they could only purchase 1 flux binding pill after occupying one of the front rooms for a whole month. Thus, if Li Yunmu hadn't been able to refine a large amount of extreme grade power grain, then to cultivate 36 flux points, he could have only relied on the slow accumulation of flux energy every day. It would a far cry from now when he had opened 2 flux points in less than a day. But although he was rich, he discovered that his wealth wouldn't be able to keep up with the cost of his cultivation. If it wasn't for the fact that the island he was trapped on was the Whale Island and the amount of extreme grade power grain which he had traded with underground Serpent was several times more than in his previous 2 transactions, then he probably would have already used up all of his wealth away on cultivation, let alone speaking of purchasing the costly small courtyard. Li Yunmu looked at the remaining flux binding pills lying in front of him with a bit of anxiety. He still had 37 pills remaining, but they would be enough only for another couple flux points. Shaking his head, he stopped thinking about it and chose to cultivate the 3rd flux point. It was the strength point on his left arm. After 2 hours and a half, he successfully opened it. Li Yunmu's flux point strength swelled from 145 points to 148 points. Clearly, the extent of rise in flux energy because of this new point wasn't that great, but when he saw the increase in his physical strength, he was stunned. His physical strength had increased from 62 oxen to 70. Other than the increase of 8 oxen in his physical strength, the price of the strength point made Li Yunmu extremely happy. It had cost him only 2 flux binding pills to open it. In the following 5 days, Li Yunmu seemed to have gone crazy. He shut himself in his small courtyard, trying to attack new flux points without stopping to rest. During that, he cultivated all the 16 flux points on his 4 limbs, and his strength had increased by an unimaginable extent. Even he himself could feel that he had turned into a monster. There wasn't any complicated reason behind it. Although he hadn't opened the 20 flux points in his chest, his flux point strength had still reached 192 points, and his physical strength had reached 105 oxen. His strength had already crossed the threshold of ordinary great flux experts. It was especially so for his physical strength, which more than doubled the threshold of 50 oxen. In other words, even if Li Yunmu was yet to cultivate the remaining 20 flux points, he still possessed the qualifications to become a great flux master. But what caused Li Yunmu to be gobsmacked was his own unique secret, which was that his flux energy strength crossed the publicly specified upper bound of 180 points. How could that be possible? It was a complete mystery, and if it spread outside, the cultivators of the origin world would probably go crazy. It has to be known that in the cultivation world, there was a jointly agreed fact that among those who cultivated 105 flux points, their flux energy strength wouldn't cross 180 points. This was a deduction obtained after the system's repeated scanning of several people. It was really like that. It was a specific upper limit which was fixed because the innate flux points of the humans of the origin world could only store so much flux energy. But Li Yunmu had smashed this rule, and he was yet to cultivate 20 more flux points. This extraordinary difference made him sense that his situation was extremely grave. But what was the cause of this transformation of his body? Li Yunmu had a hint of an idea regarding this question. But he didn't dare to believe that the seemingly ordinary meridian nurturing flux point method could surprisingly smash through the fixed upper bound of the origin world. Li Yunmu clearly understood the meaning of it. Presently, in somewhat exaggerated terms, he had turned into a human-shaped monster. Not only had his flux energy strength had crossed the ordinary limit, his physical strength far surpassed the upper limit. With 105 oxen physical strength, even if he didn't use any flux energy and just relied on his flesh, he could easily annihilate any flux expert. It wouldn't matter even if they were the first-ranked people of the top residential region of Blue Moon Sect. This was the enormous boost in strength which Li Yunmu had obtained after opening all the 16 flux points in his arms and legs in 5 days. Chapter 456 Intersect Competition. On Blue Moon Island, it was the time for intersect battles which were held once per year. The only people who had the qualifications to take part in the battle on the whole Blue Moon Island were the top 10 most powerful cultivators of each residential region. It meant only 300 cultivators participated in total. They were all famous figures in their residential regions and were the generation which would become the next batch of core disciples of Blue Moon Island. As long as they entered the great flux expert realm, they would become the core disciples and influential figures in the territory of this administrative power. Did you hear? A few days ago, our sect ran into great misfortune. A rookie of residential region 15 offended our sect's elder for some reason. As a result, that elder dispatched more than 10 of our substitute core disciples. But the majority of those people were killed by that person, with only Demon Flame and Fiend escaping alive. Every year's intersect battles was the most important event of Blue Moon Island. For those who didn't occupy the first 10 rooms in any region, the yearly event was a chance to occupy one of the top 10 rooms. Since the 300 cultivators would participate in the competition, most of them would be seriously wounded or would perish wholly in the fights. Thus, a vacancy would open up in the top 10 rooms. As for those 300 cultivators, this was their most important day. If truth be told, all of them waited for it for the whole year. What was the aim of those top 10 most powerful people of each residential region participating in the competition? Their aim was to excel among their peers and step into the heaven from earth. Usually on this day, during the inner sect competition, there would be many spectators from higher tier powers. All them were more formidable and domineering than Blue Moon Sect, and they would choose the participants they liked. If any participant showed up to be to their liking, then that person would experience a meteoric rise and could straightaway enter a second-rate power of the main continent from Blue Moon Island, this third-rate sect. If someone was extremely formidable and had great fortune, then they could even attain heaven in one step and directly join a first-rate power. But then the question arose about what did it mean to be part of a first-tier or second-tier power? And why were they so exaggerated? Regarding this, all the participants, or at least those who knew the facts, would definitely express that their reputation wasn't exaggerated. It was just that this competition was that important, because it was the method to enter a second-tier or higher-tier power. Without any special circumstances, an ordinary cultivator could only join a third-tier power at most. If they wanted to join a higher-tier power, they had to display their best performance during the inner sect competition to catch the eyes of the higher-ups. Then the next question that arose was, given that a second-tier power was just above the third tier, then how vast was the disparity between them? The answer was quite simple. A second-tier power wasn't just a few times more formidable than a third-tier power, but rather 100 or several hundred times, or maybe even 1,000 times more formidable than a third-tier power. And this was no boasting. A third-tier power like Blue Moon Sect had 30 residential regions and around 9,000 inner disciples, around 100 core disciples, as well as several tens of thousands of outer disciples. Yet the number of disciples in a second-tier power was more than 100 times that. Somewhat more formidable second-tier powers even had several thousands times more disciples. This was the distribution of organizations in the origin world. A second-tier power was more formidable than all the 6 transcending powers of Earth added together. This was the influence of the environment in which they developed, since the population of the origin world was far too enormous. Endless land mass and inexhaustible natural resources plus harsh environment would naturally cause enormous organizations to develop. Even a second-tier power was that terrifying, let alone a first-tier organization. This was the reason why Blue Moon Sect was forced to reluctantly abandon their hunt for Li Yunmu and return after single line from a minor branch of underground Serpent on Whale Island. Moreover, if a cultivator could join a second-tier power from a third-tier power, he would obtain an enormous benefit. This benefit was something which no cultivator could refuse. If they could join a second-tier power, they would obtain the qualifications to purchase the method to cultivate the 106th flux point. If they could become the core member of the second-tier power, then they would obtain the qualifications to cultivate the 107th flux point. If they could then advance another step and join the upper echelons of the second-tier power, they would obtain the qualifications to purchase the method to cultivate the final, 108th flux point. Those who knew about inside dealings could clearly understand the preciousness of methods to cultivate the last 3 flux points. After all, only those who cultivated the final 3 flux points, thus reaching the great circle of opening 108 flux points, could enter the deity realm. Those who didn't enter a second-tier power would have no hope of entering the deity realm. Because of that, there was a saying in the origin world that those who weren't able to enter a second-tier power were all dogs and fowls. And now in Blue Moon Sect word had arrived that with 3 days remaining before the inner sect competition, suddenly, 11 of the 300 participants had perished. The 11 vacancies which had appeared were greatly desired by all the disciples of the 30 residential regions, and they were willing to pay any price for them. Yes, I also heard about that. It was quite tragic. I heard that Wang Tongming, Dezhu, Ba Maluo, and others were all killed while pursuing someone. Reportedly that person called Li Yunmu originally occupied the 50th room in the residential region 15. He had truly concealed himself deeply. This is too frightening. Yes, but although it is unfortunate, the plans of heaven supersede our own. If he hadn't mistakenly offended Elder Zhang, he might have been able to jump ranks and enter this year's inner sect competition and might have entered a first-tier sect in one shot, a senior inner disciple from the older regions said with a hint of regret. Hey, Chu Min, what are you babbling? In any case, it's not us who lost this opportunity, and we are here just to watch the exciting show. Someone on the side laughed heartily. Yes. In any case, these opportunities aren't for people like us. Rather than wasting time discussing this, we should go and see who will manage to grasp those 11 vacancies which had appeared out of nowhere. You must know that this is an extremely rare chance. Chapter 457 Plan to enter second-tier power. The 11 free spots which had appeared suddenly had instantly turned into an extremely rare opportunity for the inner disciples of Blue Moon Sect. Occupying one of the top 10 rooms wasn't possible for the normal disciples, so now everyone who would be competing for the 11 free spots would be on the same level. Any disciple who was somewhat formidable was rubbing their hands and getting restless. At this moment in an obscure courtyard on Whale Island, Li Yunmu was speaking to Li Qinghong and Demon whom he hadn't met in a long time. Sit. Master, aren't you in danger? Seeing Li Yunmu living properly on this neutral island, Demon was unable to make sense of the situation. He was aware of the fact that his master had killed the sect elder's treasured son not long ago, so the hatred between the two of them wasn't ordinary. Could it be that master believes that he doesn't need to worry about their retaliation now that he escaped to this neutral island? Don't worry, the crisis has been averted for the time being. Even if that elder doesn't care about Blue Moon Sect and tries to settle his hatred in private, he won't return alive. In truth, I hope that he won't be able to control his hatred and will come here. Li Yunmu kept smiling and personally made tea for his two followers. The tea leaves he used could be considered as extremely rare. Although they weren't of peerless quality, they were grown on the Cloud Isle by those taking refuge there. It was a nameless tea unique to that island, so basically no one in the world knew about it. If not because the villagers of the Cloud Isle didn't have any means to cross the ocean, the tea leaves would definitely fetch a good price in the market of Whale Island. This good price wouldn't be in terms of silver sand coins or gold granules used by ordinary people, but contribution points. Due to the fact that the tea leaves would be bought using contribution points, it made it obvious that they had some special characteristics. As soon as Li Qinghong took the first sip, it was clear from her expression that she could sense why the tea was so special. She looked at Li Yunmu with slight confusion, but didn't say anything. This is called Cloud Isle tea, and it was discovered by me. It has many benefits, doesn't it? Li Yunmu suddenly said. It calms a person's mind and helps them concentrate. Moreover, I feel that after drinking it, the movement of flux energy in my body immediately became 20% faster. Li Qinghong stated the facts. Hearing her words, Demon was startled and abandoned the topic at hand to take a mouthful of the tea as well. Instantly, his brows became unwrinkled, and he began to enjoy it without saying anything. After a long time, he sighed in relaxation. This tea is like gold for cultivators. Its value would be astronomical. After some thoughts, Li Yunmu said, "Take some with you when you return and drink when you cultivate. Oh, and remember to conceal it." Li Yunmu had gained a general idea by then about why that little lassie Tutu had matured so quickly. Apparently, the small Cloud Isle wasn't so trifling after all. But unfortunately, he had too many tasks in front of him at that moment. Because of that, Li Yunmu could only shelve that knowledge for the time being and deal with it later. While sipping the tea, Li Qinghong asked, "Master, for what matter have you summoned us?" "I have a task for both of you. The qualifications for inner sect competition." The two followers asked in unison, since they were not stupid either. Li Yunmu nodded. "Yes. Do you have any confidence in accomplishing it?" "It could be done. If Master hadn't killed those 11 and created free spots, I wouldn't have the confidence to present the qualifications for this year's inner sect competition, but now it can be done, Li Qinghong said with confidence. I'm afraid it'll be difficult. You don't know it, but presently the attention of all the inner disciples of Blue Moon Island is on these 11 free spots. Demon smiled bitterly. Unlike Li Qinghong, he didn't dare to assure Li Yunmu. It wasn't that he wasn't working hard, but that the difference between his and Li Qinghong's foundations was too large. Originally, given that Li Qinghong only possessed H.A.C.K.'s undying sage blood and couldn't refine it, the disparity wasn't that large. But after she descended and managed to completely awaken that ancient beast's bloodline, the difference between them was continuously increasing. Li Yunmu naturally understood this situation clearly. The results of system scan of the two followers came out at that time. Presently, Demon's flux energy strength was 93 points while his physical strength was 30 oxen. Before Li Yunmu had properly cultivated his flux points, this level of strength could still obtain his attention. But presently, it could only be considered as extremely weak in his eyes. But speaking in reference to Residential Region 15, this strength surpassed that of He Mianshen who had occupied the 10th room back when he'd just come. However, if he wanted to challenge the top 10 most powerful people of the 15th residential regions now, his strength was lacking somewhat. It has to be known that the strength of the people occupying the first 10 rooms far surpassed the strength of others in the residential regions. This was how they were able to continue dominating the front 10 rooms for a long time. As for Li Qinghong, when her comprehensive strength was displayed, Li Yunmu almost convinced that the system had made a mistake while calculating. Li Qinghong's flux energy strength had reached 135 points while her physical strength was 45 oxen. How have you become so formidable? Li Yunmu was completely astonished by the results of the system's scan. With her strength, Li Qinghong definitely had the qualifications to challenge any of the top 10 most powerful people in any residential region, let alone talk about occupying one of the 11 free spots. Although the above-mentioned words were somewhat exaggerated, Li Qinghong's strength was only lacking by a bit when compared to the old monsters of the top 5 residential regions. She wasn't lacking even when compared to Fiend of the 2nd residential region. If she could completely refine the undying sage blood and gain the undying property, her actual combat strength would be enough to make that fiend lose. Her previous speech was clearly her being reserved with her words. It could not only be done, I give you the order that you must at least enter a 2nd-tier power. Your strength and potential is sufficient to achieve that, Li Yunmu suddenly said to Li Qinghong. He had already shared the method to complement flux points with them long ago, so Demon and Li Qinghong were at the same starting point as natives of the origin world. Given that the bloodline of Chao Tianbird was so powerful, Li Yunmu began to treat Li Qinghong with some seriousness. Do you wish to obtain the final 3 flux points? Li Qinghong asked. Yes. Without cultivating all the 108 flux points, it will be extremely difficult to step into deity realm. Even you should aim to obtain them. Li Yunmu then looked at Demon. There are still some time left. You've got the tea now, and I will also give you 10 flux binding pills to cultivate more flux points. Your aim is to obtain one of the 11 free spots. As for whether you can catch the eye of any 2nd-tier power, that will depend on your own luck. After he finished speaking, Li Yunmu passed Demon the 10 flux binding pills. Demon became excited when he saw the 10 flux points. After he had completed the deficiency in his flux points, he had begun to concentrate on cultivating even more of them. But without flux binding pills, he could only rely on his willpower and absorb the flux energy in the world to cultivate bit by bit. Like that, his strength naturally didn't increase quickly. Given that there was little time left, it was clear that there wouldn't be any great increase in his cultivation. But now that Li Yunmu had provided him with the 10 flux binding pills, he was confident in increasing his strength to the next level within a short time. With them, it can be accomplished, Demon declared with some confidence. Chapter 458 Opportunity provided by Underground Serpent. After sending Li Qinghong and Demon away, Li Yunmu was completely lost in his thoughts. Although he was using Li Qinghong and Demon to fight for the final 3 flux points, it wasn't sufficient. Who could say if one of them won't screw up at the most crucial time? After all, even he himself has been forced to betray the sect just before the inter-sect competition. After losing the springboard that was the sect, even if Li Yunmei was formidable, he still couldn't use this strength. This won't do. There are still 3 days left. During them, I cannot sit around waiting for others, Li Yunmei muttered after commanding Li Qinghong and Demon to strive for the final 3 flux points. Who could say how long it would take before they could become important enough in a second-tier sect, and the thing he lacked the most at the moment was time. He couldn't just wait for them to succeed. After hesitating for a long while, Li Yunmei finally decided on something and went outside the courtyard in large strides. Before long, he reached the headquarters of Underground Serpent. The position of this headquarters was extremely secret. When Li Yunmei had arrived the first time, he had used a small teleport channel in an ordinary vicious beast fur shop to get to it. Perhaps an ordinary person who had just been passively teleported wouldn't know about the genuine position of this branch of Underground Serpent, but Li Yunmei possessed the system's detection ability. With that, he had found the real position of the headquarters. It was actually established 5 kilometers under the ocean, on one side of Whale Island. He wasn't clear as to what methods or abilities had Underground Serpent used to establish a branch headquarters more than 5,000 meters under the ocean surface, but given his current strength, he didn't have any curiosity regarding it. His only priority right now was to use the quickest and most efficient method to cultivate the final 3 flux points. Otherwise, without those 3 flux points, he wouldn't have any hope of entering the deity realm eternally. Soon, he was guided to a hidden room in which An had already arrived. She had her back toward the door of the hidden room while looking at the wall in front of her in a daze. This is... Li Yunmei hadn't expected to see such a scene when he entered. But when his gaze accidentally fell on the wall, he shuddered faintly. He almost couldn't believe what was in front of his eyes. It was advanced technology, an entire field from a different plane being used in front of him. The whole wall under the ocean had been transformed into crystal. A long mountain range was reflected on it. On an enormous flat mountain, numerous ancient buildings could be seen. They were simple yet impressive, serene yet imposing. When Li Yunmei got closer, he could see people working around them. Suddenly, the scene flickered, and he could see everything better. Several disciples of the sect dressed in sect's clothing were attending to all sorts of matter on the enormous mountain peak. There were many couples indulging in lecherous activities in the trees halfway up the mountain. There was also a group of old fellows sitting on a stage at the peak and gazing toward heaven. But even more astonishing were the countless sect disciples silently cultivating in their personal houses. Apart from human cultivators, there were also all sorts of flying beasts who seemed to be completely harmonious with the group of human cultivators. There were many flying beasts which had been turned into mounts for disciples as well as land beasts which had been turned into guardian beasts for the sect. There was also a pool on the side near which no organism was allowed to go. All the characteristics of the mountain gave Li Yunmei a feeling of a majestic sect. However, his previous sect, Blue Moon Sect, couldn't even be spoken of in the same sentence as this mountain sect. This scene made Li Yunmei feel like a spectator watching a mountain sect in a movie in theater. Before long, the camera zoomed in by 10 folds, and the scene changed again, focusing on a spacious plaza for martial practice at the peak of the enormous mountain. The floor of the plaza was made of beautiful blue bricks arranged tidily. The screen focused on a huge ancient cauldron, then an unknown hall enshrined at the center of all the buildings. After the camera zoomed in again, 3 letters from ancient god age radiating extraordinary grandeur could be seen on top of the main hall. If the system didn't translate wrong, then those 3 words meant Origin God School. After this scene, the wall of the ancient room finally returned to its original state. The crystal slowly returned to being strong ocean rock. This was... Li Yunmei remained stunned for a long time. He was completely shaken by the activity in the mountain sect. On top of that, he was shocked to have finally witnessed technology which wouldn't be inferior to that of Earth's technology in any way. If that wasn't enough, he still had the question about why An had showed it to him. It had to be known that the more he learned about the matters of underground Serpent, the more dangerous his situation became. An slowly turned and explained with a slight smile, "This is a second-tier Sect base in the western part of the southern mountains. It is called Origin God Sect. Although it's just a second-tier sect, it still possesses a complete inheritance of an ancient god." After Li Yunmu heard it, he remained silent for a long time, just looking at An. "In the end, you couldn't bear it and came to find me, right?" An asked. "Yes, seems like I can't hide anything from you," Li Yunmu said with exasperation coloring his voice. "I want the final 3 flux points. What's the price for them? I can't get the final 3 flux points for you. Let alone me, even the entire underground Serpent doesn't have that ability." And paused before continuing. "But we could create an opportunity for you. By giving me a chance to enter Origin God Sect." Li Yunmu asked, understanding where she was going with those words. "That's right. In truth, we would have you impersonate someone and use that opportunity to infiltrate the sect. Naturally, the premise is that you will have the ability to attract their attention during the intersect competition," An explained. While speaking, she sized Li Yunmu up. After a careful observation, a slight hint of astonishment appeared on her face. "Seems like my concerns are unnecessary. The development of your strength far surpasses our best scenarios. So as long as you agree to this matter, there shouldn't be any problems." And looked at Li Yunmu with a firm gaze. Clearly, she knew about his original strength, and also knew that he had been cultivating in seclusion in a courtyard on Whale Island. But she hadn't expected that in less than 10 days, his strength would reach this level. Chapter 459 Underestimated. Regardless of whether Li Yunmu possessed enough flux-binding pills, he definitely wouldn't be able to break through the bottlenecks of the origin world if he didn't have enough physical strength. Usually, the speed of cultivation of a cultivator was restricted by the bottleneck of their flesh. But Li Yunmu wasn't restricted by this RUL because a few months ago the strength of his flesh had already crossed the threshold of 50 oxen required to step into Great Flux Expert realm. Not even mentioning cultivating the 16 major flux points, even if he cultivated all the remaining flux points in one breath and reached the Great Circle of Flux Expert realm, it wouldn't be any problem for him. If not for the lack of flux-binding pills and time, he would have cultivated to Great Circle in one shot and become a Great Flux Expert. Naturally, any other ordinary Flux Expert would have done so had they been in Li Yunmu's situation. But anyone who had foresight would never do that. After all, how could someone who hadn't cultivated all 108 flux points accomplish anything? Li Yunmu also wasn't any exception. If he didn't cultivate all the 108 flux points, his purpose for descending would be completely lost. After contemplating the offer for a time, Li Yunmu bluntly asked, "What do you want me to do and what do I need to obtain from the sect?" "After you have successfully infiltrated the Origin God Sect and become a formal disciple, you will be offered a test by us, Underground Serpent. If you pass it, you will obtain the qualifications to join our organization and become a member," and shared her intentions while watching Li Yunmu. What? He had never expected that she would actually recommend him to be added as a member of Underground Serpent. But this instantly raised a question about what benefits would that give him. After careful thought, Li Yunmu became aware that this would be an enormous benefit to him. After all, Underground Serpent was a first-tier organization of the origin world. In fact, it was even well known among the first-tier organizations. So who could dare to refuse this enormous opportunity to rise to heaven in one shot? As the saying goes, entering a large organization was like getting a shade of a large tree under which a small plant could grow up in peace. After all, as long as he remained by himself, then even if it wasn't pleasant to hear, he would most likely be turned into dust in the origin world. It didn't matter how talented he was in such a situation. Talent wasn't considered as anything important in this world, for there was no lack of talents but rather a lack of powerhouses. Only those who had matured and become powerhouses themselves would obtain respect in this boundless world. As for those talents who got washed out, they weren't considered as anything else but dregs. But if Lee Yunmu accepts the offer, his freedom would be restricted. After all, there was no free lunch in this world, ABD for every benefit he would need to pay a price. What will I have to do after that? He asked without giving any specific answer. You'll need to work hard to become a core disciple of Origin God Sect and obtain the sect's confidence. After that, you'll need to investigate an ancient item. If you are successful, then your position in our organization will immediately rise. And paused for a moment, then spoke up against as if having just remembered something. Oh, I forgot. Because the main headquarters considers this matter as very important, if you agree, then as long as you can enter the sect, you will become silver-ranked member. And if you manage to accomplish this mission, you will be upgraded to a gold-ranked member. Iron, silver, gold, platinum, black gold, these were the 5 classes in which all members of Underground Serpent were classified, just like the clients. Lee Yunmu being granted silver rank from the start could actually be considered as a high starting point. But he was convinced that there was definitely no free lunch in this world. Then why was the little miss in front of him giving him such a huge opportunity? How could your organization have so much confidence in me, so casually taking me in as a member? Lee Yunmu asked calmly. Without completely figuring everything out, then even if the benefits provided by Underground Serpent were even more enormous, he still wouldn't casually make a decision. But in truth he was just making a final stand. From the moment An informed him about the matter of Underground Serpent spying on Origin God Sect, he had already known that he didn't have any choice. Those that were weak didn't have the right to choose, but he still wanted to know why Underground Serpent was willing to gain a new member so casually. He couldn't believe that a first-tier organization would be so easygoing. Very simple, you are an outsider. Our organization places great importance on outsiders with potential. An smiled, but her words struck Lee Yunmu like 12th grade thunder. Although he had a feeling that the identity and origin of Descenders wasn't concealed from Underground Serpent, it was still a shock to hear it said so straightforwardly. His suddenly exposed identity made him feel as though someone had grabbed his weak spots. Moreover, after our observation the past couple days, you have been found to be the outsider with the most potential, one at least several times higher than of the group of people you asked us to investigate. In addition, you have been an excellent client of our branch, so we decided to recommend you for this opportunity, and said with a hint of sincerity. Lee Yunmu somewhat understood her intentions. It seemed like the branch of Whale Island had recommended him with a hint of goodwill so that he could become a new member of their branch. Does Underworld Serpent also accept other outsiders? He asked with some curiosity. Obviously. Outsiders who are willing and are qualified are absorbed by the organization. After all, apart from being members of our organization, they are also valuable clients, An explained. If the relationship between outsiders is that of mortal enemies, then how would the organization deal with this issue? Lee Yunmu asked the most crucial question. That's none of our concern. We would allow them to settle their issues and keep the victor. All right then, I agree. Finally, Lee Yunmu gave his consent. He had gained a little understanding about Underworld Serpent's inner workings. Frankly speaking, it was similar to an enormous multinational corporation. The nature of relationship between members and the organization wasn't unilateral, but somewhat collaborative. That being said, this organization didn't care about Lee Yunmu's origins. It seemed like it didn't place much importance on the threat of other worlds and thus dealt with Descenders casually. Given Underworld Serpent's attitude, Lee Yunmu could guess the attitude of the peak powers of the Origin world toward the Descenders. Previously, he had been afraid that if his identity as Descender was revealed, the consequences would be grave. But clearly, this was just his narrow worldview. He was like a frog in a well which had never seen the world. He was someone who believed that he possessed a precious treasure which needed to be concealed, but in reality, that precious treasure wasn't anything special when placed in the vast world. At least it wasn't a treasure which people would care about. Li Yunmu had obtained the general disposition of the upper echelons of Origin World, but it didn't include the sects like Blue Moon Sect. Because of that, it was better for him to conceal his identity as a descender if he wanted to remain safe. Naturally, only Li Yunmu knew that although the gigantic organization possessed enormous power, it still underestimated him. Since he needed to find the shade of a large tree, it didn't matter to him whether he gained it by choice or not. Regardless of how many benefits the large tree provided, he himself would decide what to do with it. Like that, Li Yunmu convinced himself about his decision. He also didn't have many problems with the recommendation to enter the underworld Serpent. He would blend among its ranks until necessary like a viper. Chapter 460 Infiltrating Profound South Seconds. In the Middle Continent, on a mountain in the remote western part of the southern mountains, there was a mountain called Nanmai. It was situated at the far end of the mountain range. On this day, a simple and crude teleport channel at the foot of the Nanmai mountain lit up, and a youth carrying a blade on his back walked out. "Ah, elder brother Qing Yang, you have returned in time." Two outer disciples guarding the teleport channel immediately recognized Lin Qingyang who had come out. "Yes, I've returned," Li Yunmu replied with a deadpan expression. That was right, Li Yunmu had assumed the identity of an inner disciple of 21st Residential Region of Profound South Sect. He was called Lin Qingyang, a name with which he was quite familiar. It was the name of Lin Yuero's dead brother. Obviously, the Lin Qingyang whom Li Yunmu was impersonating wasn't a waste like Lin Yuero's brother, because this person was an occupant of the first room of the 21st Residential Region. It might be a slight exaggeration, but it could be said that this Lin Qingyang had already garnered some fame even without being a core disciple of Profound South Sect. "Well then, take care elder brother Qingyang. We hope that you are unrivaled in this year's great competition." The two guard disciples rained unctuous praises while Li Yunmu departed, but once he was out of sight, one of them couldn't control himself anymore and began to curse. "What a joke, what sort of god does he think he is? Always with a scowling face and doesn't even look people in the eye." The other guard shook his head and advised his companion, "All right, that's enough. Even if you abuse him, he is still the most powerful person of a residential region, so putting on airs is normal. We are just outer disciples, so naturally he won't bother with us. We must work harder." Although Li Yunmu was quite far, he was still able to hear the conversation between the two of them without missing any word with his keen hearing. Their conversation made the corners of Li Yunmu's mouth rise slightly. It seemed like the rumors about Lin Qingyang never bothering about others and always scowling were true. Since he was impersonating this person, it was important for him to play the part seriously. Li Yunmu smiled to himself while looking up at Nanmai Mountain. It wasn't actually just a single huge mountain, but was a part of a mountainous land in the western part of southern region. The entire Nanmai mountain region contained 109,765 known mountain, each of which had a master. That mountain range could be described as 100,000 mountain range. Unlike the exaggeration in fiction, it was a genuine 100,000 mountain range. The teleport channel in the small village from which Li Yunmu had just come was a resting settlement for outer disciples. In such villages, apart from the relatives of Profound South Sect's disciples, many outer disciples had also settled. The simple Profound South Sect controlled more than 100 such villages. Reportedly, the Origin God Sect is located in the depths of this region. While climbing the peak of the Profound South Sect, Li Yunmu kept muttering to himself. Naturally, he was talking to the system. While climbing up the mountain, he occasionally ran into some disciples going down. When most of them saw Lin Qingyang returning, they looked over with astonishment. But very few of them greeted him. Most just hurried on their way with a changed expression. It could be said that Lin Qingjiang's relations with people in South Profound Sect were beyond poor. But Li Yunmu didn't care. Since he was impersonating Lin Qingyang, the less people he came in contact with, the better it was for him. It was likely that Misan had chosen Lin Qingyang to be replaced by Li Yunmu precisely because of this reason. Lin Qingyang cultivated a strange cultivation method which had a formidable effect on his physical strength. However, it also brought some subtle changes to the temperament of the cultivator who trained in it. Thus, Li Yunmu didn't have to care much about his appearance or actions. However, he still had a meticulously trimmed beard and long eyebrows while always wearing a deadpan expression. He adorned a cyan gown always worn by Lin Qingyang and was carrying a large blade on his back. With that, even if there were some changes in his appearance, the fellow disciples of Profound South Sect still treated him as Lin Qingyang who had returned. Naturally, even so, impersonating a disciple of a sect of the origin world wasn't easy. The biggest problem was the identity tile. Even if someone had all sorts of abilities, they still may not be able to make a fake identity tile. Regardless of whether it was for being allocated a room in residential regions or using teleport channels or contribution points, all of them needed the personal identity tile. Without proper methods to deal with it, any impersonator would be exposed quickly. But this final trap was also dealt with by the all-powerful underground Serpent. Who knew what method and had used, but Li Yunmu had been provided with the identity tile of Lin Qingyang. Although he couldn't fake it forever since it would only work for 10 days, those 10 days would be enough for him. After all, Li Yunmu had no plans to stay in Profound South Sect for more than 3 days. This third-tier sect was only a springboard for him. Before long, Li Yunmu returned to the extremely familiar first room in the 21st residential region and immediately closed the door. Instantly, the news of Lin Qingyang returning 2 days before the intersect competition spread like wildfire through the 36 residential regions of Profound South Sect. Some people were concerned while others were anxious. The news of Lin Qingyang who had disappeared for many days returning today caused a slight disturbance in the Profound South Sect, but nothing more. Li Yunmu stayed in his room under the pretext of cultivating in seclusion while waiting for the next 2 days to pass. With some time at his hands, he again used the medicinal liquid. Sensing the small transformations because of the medicinal power permeating his body, Li Yunmu couldn't calm himself. He was certain that the reason behind the flux energy in his body crossing the universal limit was precisely because of meridian nurturing flux point technique. Although the amount of medicinal power he absorbed every day was very small, his cultivation would definitely become more formidable if he didn't skip any days. Li Yunmu's flux energy strength would then surpass that of cultivators on the same level. Moreover, the more he cultivated this technique, the greater the disparity between them would become. In time, it could reach a terrifying degree. Knock, knock. Before even a day had passed, someone knocked on the sign outside the door.